So when we're building Conway's Game of Life, you know that the end product, we're using a table, right? It's a grid, it has cells in it, and those cells have, or that table has columns and rows. And so that table visually represents very much what we're after. The trouble is that when we're actually coding the Conway's Game of Life, we need to sort of keep track of where each cell is and what the surrounding cells are. Because when we're trying to determine whether, say, this particular cell should become alive in the next round, we have to count the number of surrounding cells, and then based on the number of surrounding cells, then we either kill it or we bring it to life. So for example, here we have this cell, and we would want to count the cells in its vicinity, these, these cells, and determine whether it should live or die. In this case, it would just stay dead because it only has one cell next to it. However, this cell, for example, has three cells surrounding it. So it would come to life, as we know when we evolve. It goes like this. That comes to life. Um, so we need some kind of data structure that will allow us to represent where one cell is, not just visually, but represent where it is in relation to its surrounding cells. And the way we can do that is with something called an array of arrays. And let me now describe what an array of arrays it looks like. Okay. Here we have a simple array, right? JavaScript array. It's a one-dimensional array, 1, 2, 3. We've seen plenty of these before. What we're after is a two-dimensional array, which is basically another way of calling a two-dimensional array is an array of arrays. And here we have an array, right? Here's the beginning of the array, and then inside it there are some other arrays. Okay, there's three arrays, and actually you can sort of think of this as this array of arrays as like a tic-tac-toe table. So it's an array here, and then you have all these three inner arrays, one array, two arrays, three arrays that are inside or nested inside this outer array. So, so far so good, yeah. How then do we represent, say, this, how do we access this particular value with an array of arrays? Well, it's not really so much different than with a one-dimensional array. You first go, so this array is called grid, right? So you first go grid bracket 1 bracket, which means access the second internal array in the grid, which is this array, and then access the third value in that second array, which is this value 6. Okay, so then how would we access this value? Well, simple. We would go grid, and then the third array in that third internal array in that grid, which is, because we count from 0, it's 2, and then the first item in that third array, which is 0. So it would be grid 2, 0. Let's just put these to the console, see what we get. And indeed, 6 is outputted with regard to this, and 7 is outputted with regard to this. So the second challenge we face is if we have a data structure that can represent a grid, how can we then output that back out to screen? And it's actually pretty easy conceptually, especially if you sort of think of the outer array as the y-axis and these internal arrays as the x-axis, or as the row, right? These as the rows of the grid. Okay, So here we're doing that. Here we have a for loop that's iterating through down through the y, from y0 to y2, okay? And then for each of those rows that you get to in on the y-axis, you then iterate through the x-axis. So you count down to the first row, and then you iterate through this row, and then you count down to the second row, and then you iterate through it. That's the x-axis. You count down to the third row on the y-axis, and then you iterate through that row. And all along, you just build a string here, and then after each row, you add a break, and after you've got the whole string built, then at the end, we're outputting it here. By the way, if you prefer the for each syntax, instead of using a for loop, you can do it that way. And here we have the grid, and then for each array in that grid, we run this function here, which processes that array, that internal array slash row, and for each of the elements in that row, it does this other function, and basically it's just outputting the cell in that row. And you can see that this is what I'm outputting to console here, is as it's going through this for each loop, it outputs the values in that first array, and then it outputs console finished. Then it outputs the values in the second internal array and outputs row finished, etc.